Hello and welcome back to another Dare to Game video. Today we're playing Mountain Blade Bannerlord, and we're going to be going over another Napoleonic Warfare mod video, and today's is going to be another uniform one. Today it's going to be for the Austrian uniform. And now one thing to get out of the way right away is that we are dealing with Austria-Hungary, so there are a bunch of Hungarian uniforms. We're not going to be looking at them today. If you want to, I can do another video for them later. In the game, they're just kind of combined, but you don't see as much attention given to the Hungarian stuff. Their troops are just mixed in with the Austrian troop trees, so it's an interesting way to balance it, but I can at some point do that in the same essence as the Italian stuff. There's a bunch of Italian uniforms in the game that are just part of the French faction because, you know, Italy isn't its own defined faction in this game. It's just part of France. I can do either of those, Italy or Hungary at some point, but today we're just going to be looking at Austria. So let's just dive on in and start going through the Austrian uniforms. Keep in mind, there are instances where things might not mesh perfectly because in the game for a specific troop type or a specific uniform, they might use a different one. So they might use a piece of clothing from a different faction. We will not do that. We are limiting ourselves to just Austrian pieces of clothing and equipment and everything, as well as the basic unnamed ones. So a bicorn or a tricorn or a cavalry bandolier, things like that that can be used across all factions can also. So let's just dive on in and start with the first uniform. And the first uniform we're looking at is the Austrian Dragoon uniform. So this is a cavalry unit, a dragoon obviously, and interestingly, significantly lighter looking than most of the factions in the game. I like it though because, you know, it's a very clean white with just green accents on it. So it looks quite good. This uniform is made up of the Austrian Cavalry Rupenhelm, the Cavalry Bandolier, the Austrian Dragoon uniform, the Officer's Gloves white, and the Austrian Officer Boots. So I think it looks pretty good. It's obviously a very basic looking uniform, but that, you know, makes sense because it fits that whole Austrian vibe. I like it. It's very white if you're going for that. I wish the Rappenhelm would be, I mean, I guess I don't wish anything because it does look like of what I think of when I think of a Rappenhelm, but, you know, if it was white, it would obviously match the uniform a lot better. White and gold or white and green would be even better. But with all that being said, still a pretty cool looking uniform, and I like it a lot. Next, we're looking at the Austrian Chevauleger uniform. So this is another cavalry unit. This one notably using a cavalry musket. So they're just a cavalry unit that was known for that. The Chevauleger is very interesting. Again, it's a super basic looking uniform, but again, I like it because it's white and green, so it just looks good. This one is made up of the Austrian Cavalry Rupenhelm, just like the last one, the Cavalry Bandolier, the Austrian Chevauleger uniform, so it's just this plain green coat, the Officer's Gloves white, and the Austrian Officer's Boots. So it's very similar to the last one. It's basically just the coat that switches, but, you know, I think you'll agree it makes it look like an entirely different uniform. So yeah, I like this one. Like I said, it's got a different vibe than the last one because the last one's primarily a melee unit. This one is a skirmisher / mounted ranged unit, so they're slightly different, but I do like it. So yes, that is the Chevauleger, which is a fun word to say. Let's move on to the next Austrian uniform. And our next one is another cavalry unit. This time it's the Austrian Hussar uniform, which, you know, I like the Hussar uniforms in the game. They look good, and this one is no exception to that. Definitely a lot of gold and blue going on, which automatically just looks excellent. So this one's made up of the Austrian Hussar Shako, the Austrian Hussar equipment, the Austrian Hussar uniform, the Officer's Gloves white, and the Austrian infantry gaiters. So interestingly enough, not wearing cavalry boots, but still very, very cool uniform. I love the like dark blue with gold accents. That looks sharp. This uniform looks excellent. There's very little clipping. You can see there's a little bit of clipping here on the Austrian Hussar equipment. So I don't love that, but it's not super noticeable unless you're staring at it like I am now. And I think that the Austrian Hussar Shako looks awesome. It's very clean and tall looking, and the yellow accents on it just are excellent. Makes him even taller because he's got the big feather on top. So yes, I quite like this one. It's definitely an excellent uniform. But yes, that is the Austrian Hussar uniform. Next, we have the Officer Jaeger, or the Austrian Jaeger officer. I screwed that up when I was saying it, uniform. And this one is very, very unique, mostly because of the Jaeger hat. It's, you know, an iconic hat from the time that most factions definitely can't compete with. But I think the uniform itself does look very, very cool. So this one is made up of the Austrian Jaeger officer Korshat, the Austrian equipment black, the Austrian Jaeger officer uniform, the Officer Gloves black, and the Austrian Jaeger officer boots. Gotta say a lot of words for this uniform, but honestly, looks great. I love the like light blue with the weird teal accents and the gold belt on it. It looks great. It's definitely very Napoleonic era for a uniform because you can tell at some point people started with this uniform probably caring about function, but then the form kind of took over with how flamboyant a lot of the color choices and styles are with this one. But I definitely like it. It's a interesting looking and unique uniform, and it stands out very, very well in the mod as a whole. So yes, that is the Austrian Jaeger officer. Next up, we have the Austrian Grenzer uniform, and this is for obviously the Grenzer unit, which is a frontier or border guard troop used during the Napoleonic War. So interesting color choices on it, but again, it's unique and I like it. Pretty basic uniform overall. It's made up of the Austrian shako, the Austrian equipment, the Austrian Grenzer uniform, the officer's gloves wool, and the Austrian infantry gaiters. And now there are two variants for this uniform. You can see we have the Austrian Grenzer uniform 3, and then we have the Austrian Grenzer uniform 9. They just have that different color variant. But other than that, the uniforms themselves stay the same. So I like these ones. I don't like the Austrian shakos as much as I like a lot of the other shakos because of the weird brim thing. Instead of just having the guard down in front, it kind of goes all the way around back. Like, logically, it makes sense to me because it offers you some sun protection and all that sort of stuff. But looks weird. But other than that, solid uniform. I like both of them. I probably like the 3 variant better just because the orange on brown looks a little bit better than the light blue on brown. But overall, solid uniforms. Next up, we have one uniform that is, again, 4 because there are 4 different variants, but they're all the same other than the jacket. This one is the Austrian line infantry. So this is your basic, most of the Austrian infantry troops in the game are going to look something like this. This one is made up of the Austrian shako, the Austrian equipment, the Austrian line uniform, the officer's gloves white, and the Austrian infantry gaiters. So very basic looking. Again, it fits with that mostly white vibe that we see from a lot of the Austrian troops. Like I said, there are 4 variants of this one. There's the Austrian line uniform 1, which is white and red, the Austrian line officer 4, or Austrian line uniform 4, which is white with the blue accents, the Austrian line uniform 14, which is white with black accents, and the Austrian line uniform 59, which has those orange accents. So other than that, other than the jacket variant, they're all the same. Like, the uniform just looks the same overall, and I think it's a decent looking uniform on the whole. But interestingly, you will see those color variants. It's kind of annoying when you get just a smattering of them in the game, but considering the uniform itself is mostly white, it actually doesn't bother me that much. Having a bunch of, ones with orange accents and black and red and blue, it's all fine because most of the uniform is still identical. So I quite like the line infantry uniform. It's, like I said, what you're going to see. Most of your Austrian troops are going to be wearing some variant of this, and I think it looks pretty good. Next up, we have the just generic Austrian officer uniform, and I actually quite like this one. It's, again, very unique out of uniforms in the game, but I think it does a really good job of selling that projecting Austrian power, because I think it looks really cool. And obviously, I love the muted colors with the brighter accents. I think that looks excellent. So this uniform is made up of the Austrian officer bicorn, the Austrian equipment black, which is optional. I just think it looks good on the uniform, the Austrian officer greatcoat, the officer gloves black, and the Austrian officer boots. So like I said, very gray themed uniform, but it's one of the rare instances where I think the bicorn actually looks really good with a uniform. Like, this uniform looks sharp, and because of the pack on the back, I think it looks good with the bicorn, whereas a lot of times they don't. But of course, the Austrian officer's bicorn might be the best looking bicorn in the game. So yeah, really like this one. It's one of my favorite uniforms overall, definitely one of the best for the Austrian faction. Next, we have one that I don't like nearly as much. It's the Austrian Landwehr. So this one kind of misses the mark for me. I guess it's probably the lack of a belt that makes the longer coat just look weird. But this one's made up of the Austrian Jaeger corset, the infantry bandolier, the Austrian surgeon coat, the officer gloves wool, and the Austrian infantry gaiters. So I get it's a basic recruit. This one is your lowest level basic Austrian recruit. So it makes sense that it mostly looks thrown together like an infantry set of clothing, but I don't love it nearly as much as I like a lot of the other uniforms in the game. So yeah, it exists. Next up, we have the Austrian skirmisher troop. This one is another real low-level basic one, which should be obvious with the pieces that make it up. I actually like it a little bit less, a little bit more than the last one, just because the coat's shorter, so therefore, even though it's basic, it doesn't look as bad. But yeah, this is the skirmisher. This one's made up of the Austrian Jaeger corset, the infantry bandolier, the Austrian recruit uniform, the officer's gloves wool, and the Austrian infantry gaiters. So very, very similar to the last one we did. I think this one's a little bit better, and like I said, it's weird considering this one is the recruit uniform, but it honestly just looks better than the last one. So that is the Austrian skirmisher uniform. Earlier, we looked at the Austrian Jaeger officer. Now we're just looking at the standard Austrian Jaeger. So it's the same troop type, just this is the enlisted variant. And so it's going to look very similar to that uniform. This one's made of the Austrian Jaeger corset, the cavalry bandolier, the Austrian Jaeger uniform, the officer gloves white, and the Austrian Jaeger gaiters. So again, cavalry unit, looks quite good. Not nearly as flashy as the officer variant, but that makes sense considering that's how all uniforms work in this time period. But yeah, that's the standard Jaeger uniform. We have another one here that looks very similar to one that we covered earlier. Earlier we did the Austrian Dragoon. This one is the Austrian Dragoon officer, so other than that, it looks almost exactly the same. So it's made up of the Austrian Cavalry Raupenhelm, the Cavalry Bandolier, the Austrian Dragoon officer uniform, the officer gloves white, and the Austrian officer boots. So like I said, it's most of the same pieces and the design is almost exactly the same. The only key difference is this gold belt around it, which, yes, it does make it look considerably fancier and would help to identify someone as an officer, but other than that, it looks almost exactly the same. So that is the Austrian Dragoon officer uniform. Next up, we have another uniform that is once again a set of 4 different variants, but the only thing that changes is the uniform part. This is the Austrian officer, so it's a real basic officer unit. It's an infantry one though. This one looks pretty good. Again, it reminds me a lot of the Dragoon uniform, just similar style-wise, and obviously a lot of the elements look very similar, but it is distinct from it. So this one's made up of the Austrian officer Raupenhelm, the infantry bandolier, the Austrian officer uniform, the officer gloves white, and the Austrian officer boots. And now, like I said, there are 4 variants. This is the Austrian officer uniform 1. It has the red accents. The Austrian officer uniform 4 has the blue accents. The 14 has the black accents. And the 59 has those orange accents. So like I said, it's the same type of stuff. They're just unit distinctions from real life, but for some reason they wanted to add all 4 of the different variants in the game, and so they did. Out of all of them, I don't know. I would probably pick black, but that's just because I like the understated colors better. I think they all look good enough in their own right, but yes, this is the general look of Austrian officers in this game. Next up, we have probably my favorite one, which is the Austrian General. It should be obvious why it's my favorite. It's very flashy and cool looking, and obviously it's a general, which is, you know, how I like to see myself when I'm playing games like this. But overall, it is just a really well-designed uniform, and I love the color scheme of it. So this one is made up of the Austrian General Bicorn, the Austrian General Band, the Austrian General Uniform, the Officer Gloves White, and the Austrian General Boots. So mostly named pieces. The gloves are the only generic piece. All of this was designed to go together, and I think they did a great job because it looks excellent. Just a very, very good uniform that none of it clashes. It looks historically authentic, and I just love how it looks in general. Very well done. Probably my favorite out of all the Austrian uniforms. Next up, we have the Austrian Cuirassier. So this is a heavy cavalry unit. This uniform is made up of the Austrian Cavalry Raupenhelm, the Cavalry Bandolier, the Austrian Cuirassier uniform, the Officer Gloves White, and the Austrian Officer Boots. So very, very white themed. I love the little red accents on it. It does have the breastplate covering, which I like for the heavy cavalry units in the game. Interestingly, nothing on the back though. Just the front side, which, you know, did happen in history, but it makes it very front heavy. So I'm always interested by that design. But whatever the case is, I think it looks quite good. I think it would help to have a Raupenhelm that matched some of the uniforms better instead of just using the same exact one for every single cavalry uniform and sometimes infantry. But overall, it is a pretty good looking uniform. There's a couple texture clips. So like the cavalry bandolier clips through the breastplate in a couple spots, and you can see that the uniform clips through the breastplate as well, which is interesting enough. Not the best one in the world, still looks pretty good, and again, unless you're staring at it in the screen like this, you don't really notice it nearly as much. But overall, I really like this one. I think it looks pretty dang good. It's not very gaudy, which a lot of heavy cavalry uniforms in the mod do tend to get. So yes, that is the Cuirassier uniform. Next, we have the officer variant of the Cuirassier. So this is the Austrian officer or Cuirassier officer uniform, made up of very similar components, but slightly different, and you can see it's a little bit more flashy for it. So this one's made up of the Austrian officer Raupenhelm, the cavalry bandolier, the Austrian Cuirassier officer uniform, the officer gloves white, and the Austrian officer boots. So like I said, I like this one more than the last one. It still has the same clipping issues, which I don't like, but it's a little bit more gaudy, and so therefore is just fun. You can see all the reflective gold accents that match each other, a little gold belt and everything. So looks pretty dang solid. Definitely like it a decent amount. Pretty cool looking in my opinion. And our last 2 uniforms are very similar, so I'm just going to do them sort of in one setting. They are the Austrian Grenadier. So this is going to be your top tier infantry units for the Austrian faction. And so they look a lot like the other infantry units, just with slight variations. So this is the standard one, the enlisted one. And again, there are going to be multiple variants, but I've already showed you all the variants, so I'm not going to show you them here again, but there will be 4 different color variants. This one is made up of the Austrian Grenadier bearskin, the Austrian equipment, the Austrian line uniform. Again, there are 4 different color variants, the officer glove white, and the Austrian infantry gaiters. So like I said, these are your top tier infantry units for the Austrian faction. They look pretty cool. I actually really like the Grenadier hat. It's one of the best looking hats that you can see in the game, so I really like this one. But that is the standard enlisted one. We have the Grenadier officer's uniform, which is almost exactly the same. It just swaps out a couple different pieces. So this one's made up of the Austrian Grenadier officer bearskin, which is almost indistinguishable in my opinion. It looks almost exactly the same as the last one. Then we have the Austrian equipment, the Austrian officer uniform. Again, there are 4 different color variants. We're just showing you the first one. The officer's gloves white, and the Austrian officer boots. So, like I said, almost exactly the same uniform, and both of them look good. I've got no complaints that they look similar, because I really like the Grenadier uniforms. They're classy and not gaudy at all. But that is it. That's all of the Austrian uniforms in the entire mod, or at least all the ones I've been able to find and isolate, you know, the variations between. So, like I said, there are also Hungarian uniforms for this faction, and if you'd like to see that, let me know, and I can figure them all out and do that at some point in the future. But for now, that is all for today. Hope you enjoyed the video. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching another Dare to Game video. If you liked this video, please leave a like and a comment. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you like my content and would like to support this channel, consider becoming a member today for as little as $1.99 a month. It makes a huge difference. But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day. I'll see you next time.